Welcome to a CNBC Africa panel special coming to you from Kigali, Rwanda. And today we will be having a discussion around water, sanitation, hygiene in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, this is something that has been taken for granted, but if we had to go back to our childhood days, we were asked to always wash our hands before every meal, before touching any surface, after touching any surface, or even just after playing with each other. But have we drawn lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic that some of the consequences of the pandemic could have been avoided if we had just followed the basics of water, sanitation, and hygiene? And with us is a panel of experts who have joined us to help us break this down. Now, do you want to be part of this conversation? Tweet us at CNBC Africa, or you could tag me directly at The Real Kwizera. Now, I want to introduce to you our panel of experts. I'll start with Olutayo Bankole, or who we'll call Tayo, throughout this conversation. She is the Regional Country Director of WaterAid. We also have Nachilala Nkombo. She is the Country Director of WWF, based out of Zambia. And we also have Mr. Maurice Kwizera, who's the Rwanda Country Director as well of WaterAid. And I would like to start with you, Mrs. Tayo. Let's just take it a few steps back in regards to the history of pandemics. When we look at previous pandemics that have happened previously, why didn't we draw and why didn't we learn from the hygiene lessons there to be prepared for something like the COVID-19 pandemic right about now?
I think I wouldn't agree totally with you that we have not learned. Because if you look at our continent, Africa, we've had a number of pandemics. We have Ebola that sprang up in several countries in West Africa. We had also within the East African region also, we had DRC also being exposed to Ebola. I think that really did a lot to prepare us Africans for this kind of pandemic, so to speak. Because the basic issues around that also was sticking strictly to ensuring that you're protecting yourselves by washing your hands with soap and very clean water. So we have a bit of experience there. And if you look at how the countries that have had the outbreaks of Ebola in Africa handled it, you will see that with COVID-19, the difference between those countries who had been exposed to that is quite different from others who did not have Ebola in their countries. And some of the examples that I've given, there are quite a number of countries, actually, including Rwanda, that heard about the Ebola pandemic coming from Congo across the border. However, there were a lot of measures that were put in place from that time. And it was like when COVID-19 then hit, it was like going back into autopilot and then increasing the intensity of the intervention, and of course, exposing people more to campaign messages around hand washing and the washing of hand with soap and all that. So that shows that definitely we've had some experiences. I do agree also with you that to an extent, countries that had never really been exposed to some of these pandemics were kind of stuck, they were confused, they didn't know what to do. And so for me, the interventions from the various governments working very closely with WHO really did a lot to also bringing people up to speed around that. So for me, I think, Africa kind of prepared, follow through may have been the issue, but places that had the pandemics before, like Ebola, actually they bounced back faster.
So, I want to stay with you for just a little bit. 40%, according to the World Health Organization, 40% of people living in sub-Saharan Africa 783 million people have no access to clean water. 40% of those 783 million people live in sub-Saharan Africa. Now, if lessons were picked up previously, why are we still having this challenge of access to clean water?
Okay. I think one of the things that we need to realize is that ensuring that people have clean water in Africa is a challenge. We need to recognize that. And some of the work that we have done as WaterAid is, to what extent are we working closely with the authorities, whether in governments, whether other civil society organizations, other stakeholders, to ensure that we actually working closely with them to meet the SDGs around SDG 6, especially around water, sanitation, and hygiene. So for us, one of the things that we are determined to do is one of our key mantras, as you know by now, is that we believe that it is possible to have water, sanitation, and hygiene by 2030. And everything that we have done from the very word go has been geared towards how do we ensure support is given to the right quarters, whether through the governments in building systems, supporting the utilities, ensuring that the most marginalized communities that do not have water, they do have water. And we've done a lot around advocacy as well to ensure that we campaign and say there should be an increase in the finances and the budget that is allocated for water, sanitation, and hygiene in every one of these countries. However, we must also recognize that it is not possible to have all the financials because there are a lot of competing demands from governments, from donors, from civil society, and the rest of us competing for that same space with the others. For example, we're talking about others like health, others like education. So the competition is huge and the need is great. So for us, yes, we did not really get there because we're still on that journey. And Africa is still on the journey to providing adequate water for the people in Africa because of finances majorly. Secondly, one of the key things that has also impeded that, if we are being truly honest about this, is the fact that we sometimes do not prioritize the most marginalized folks who sit in the rural areas. We tend to concentrate on the cities and on the big towns to provide water in those spaces. And then those who are left behind are those ones eventually who are the ones in the rural areas. And one of the things that we've also done as WaterAid, and of course working with other institutions like the RAUSI and Africa Development Bank and the rest of them, is to ensure that there's a clear focus around rural water supply and sanitation, meaning that we focus in those areas to see how do we help to fast track the work that has already been started by governments and what is already going on there. So to an extent, I agree with you, but it's not something that can be done within a day. It's about how do we continue to advocate and ensure that policies that make a difference in the lives of the poor, where safe water is concerned, are implemented, and we support as best as we can, working with other partners to ensure that this actually gets to the root of the matter. So now relating it to the pandemic that you mentioned and the current context that we have, if you look at where we're at now, I think for us is an opportune time to be able to say that we have not prioritized water in the places where we need to. Now, this pandemic is reminding us that no matter what we do, when you look at the SDGs, without water, sanitation, and hygiene, we are simply kidding ourselves, because at the end of the day, this is the basic human rights that we have, the basic. If people have access to this, then they can live longer because their health is better. They can have wash in schools and students can remain in school and have quality education. We can have climate change can be managed more effectively, and so on like that. So for us, if we put wash right at the center, and this opportunity that we have now has shown to the entire world that whilst we don't have a solution to COVID, so to speak, but we do have prevention. How do we ensure that hygiene behavior change around washing of hands frequently with soap and water is important? And to an extent, that's what we have been supporting governments with in all the countries that we're in, to ensure that even those marginalized areas, areas that are hard to reach, areas that are the slum areas that do not have access to this, WaterAid has done quite a lot across the continent to ensure that we provide and support to ensure water is available there. And of course, the utilities are the ones that we work very closely with to ensure that those water are actually provided to the people. And then another thing that we've done is that there's a lot of campaign right now that we're doing around hand washing. Last week was the Global Hand Washing Day that we have. And there were lots of activities that were happening across all our countries, including Rwanda, in East Africa, to actually continue to highlight and campaign that this is the first line of defense to prevention of COVID-19.
I want to bring Nachilala into the conversation. Now, Nachilala, just using Zambia as a case study, according to UNICEF, 44% of the rural population in the country has no access to water. But now, the population of sub-Saharan African countries has more or less doubled, or to an extent quadrupled in the last 25 years. But water resources or access infrastructure has had a minimal improvement. Now, how do you get on board governments to ensure that policies are in place to prioritize access to water? And Maurice, I want you to dive in as well after Nachilala.
Well, thank you so much, Arnold, for this opportunity for WWF to share its perspectives. As you know, we are a conservation organization whose priority areas also lie in the important pandemics. It speaks to the large underinvestment, not only in our health systems, but also underinvestments in our water management system. Actually worse in terms of the population, the rural population that doesn't have access to piped water or clean water. And I think that COVID-19 has been a wake-up call. Water being the first line of defense, I think it's really sad that 56 years after independence, we have 6.8 million Zambians that do not have access to clean water. So when you look at the challenge of rural communities, this is also worsened by the fact that we basically are faced with the challenge of climate change, which has increased the levels of water insecurity or has reduced possibilities of water that is available. And therefore you find that because they are not connected to taps and pipes, the main majority that do not have boreholes have to go to the river. But then it's the same river that wildlife actually goes to. So there's that dimension of a challenge. And so what WWF in Zambia has been trying to do is to try and get the government to strengthen its governance of water resources as a key input in the attainment of the social and economic sustainable development goals. Some of the challenges that we see as an organization are drying rivers, for example, drying watersheds. And these things are happening because there is not enough protection or measures that are put in place to guarantee the supply of this water, or what we refer to as water as security. We also have a big problem with respect to how water is actually allocated. Again, in some of the rural areas that we work with, local communities don't have access to this water. Therefore, they cannot fight COVID-19 and similar epidemics more efficiently because there's been a lot of damming on the rivers. So when water is interrupted, it means that the people downstream, whether it's for sanitation, for food security to be better managed, how investment in water infrastructure can actually improve, and also how we look at reducing the degradation that's happening at the river sources at a water basin level. Because we want industry as a continent, but we are not accounting for some of the other factors that affect water security, such as pollution. We're a mining country. And I'm sure you've seen a recent report on BBC that's speaking to how lead mining has led to poisoning or poor health outcomes of a particular community. A lot of our rivers that the majority of our rural population depend on have been polluted. So part of strengthening water governance is to also get private sector on board to take account in terms of how do we use water efficiently, how do we have equitable water resource plans, and also how do we reinvest to make sure that the sources of water the natural sources of water keep regenerating. And I'm sure you've seen some of the examples from Kenya where President Uhuru Kenyatta has ordered demolition of buildings that were allocated in the wrong places at water recharge points. What happens when you destroy a natural water system? It means that when you dig a borehole, you try to access water, you will not find it. So these are some of the issues that WWF has been looking at, beyond looking at how then do we improve access to water for rural communities. Yes, we've put boreholes in a number of rural communities that has reduced the burden that women do have in terms of walking long distances to the river. In some cases, from 5 hours of that task to 10 minutes when a borehole is close by. But what we are saying as WWF is that for us to improve the security of water for all our populations, we need to secure the sources of this water, both in urban areas and in rural areas.
A very detailed answer there. Maurice, bring you into the conversation. How do we improve accessibility of water to those rural communities?
Thank you very much, Kwizera. That's a very good question, actually. And this has been our main focus, improving access, and not just access, but sustainable and inclusive access to most remote communities. To be able to achieve this sustainable access, there are many things that needs to take place, actually. One of them is in relation to increase the financing. Increase the financing for rural water is of paramount importance, and we have been advocating as WaterAid here in Rwanda for increased finance in rural water, which in some cases has been low on funding. And the other aspect is actually on proper planning of wash services. You know, for water services, it's also thinking about how water will be flowing every day constantly. If I come back after 2, 3, 4 years, a pipe has been laid, will I find the water flowing and people being able to fetch water within the required distance from their household? This requires a lot of thinking, strategic thinking around planning, food costs, management costs, operational costs, to make sure that any service provider, being government or any other private operator, is able also to make profit, because at the end, if a service provider is not making a profit from the services provided, then the aspect of sustainability is not there. So we have been supporting the government in proper planning and looking at service delivery at area-wide. We have introduced actually a concept called district-wide approach, whereby we look at a district as a whole or a city as a whole, and related planning, also reflecting on food cost, as I earlier mentioned. And we are happy that the government has actually adopted this approach of planning, and it has been part and parcel of the national policies and strategies for water and sanitation service delivery. We have specifically supported some of the districts we work with to develop a fully costed wash investment planning for longer term, avoiding just 1 year planning, but having a full picture is taking into consideration many parameters, including the demographies, including the cost, including the threat of the climate change and other factors. So that's how we look at sustainable access, especially for rural. But also on the other side, we think that it's necessary to increase the level of accountability in the delivery of water and sanitation services. And we have been trying to ignite discussions around accountability mechanisms in the provision of water services, especially for rural. We have worked with our national utility, WASAC, to put in place, for example, rural customer feedback mechanisms. How do we ensure communication between a water user in rural and the service provider and the local authority and the national utility and the national regulator? It's very important to have in place a mechanism that allow users of rural water to communicate with different stakeholders, which we think is very important in increasing accountability in how private operators respond on the quality and sustainability of the services. Quite many initiatives, and Rwanda is really on good track on providing water, being in the urban, but also in rural. but rural remain a challenge, of course. If you look at the geography of the country, some of the people difficult to bring water close to them. So full access to rural or to rural communities requires a lot of thinking and a lot of planning. That goes even beyond WASH, goes to rural settlement reviews, that goes to different policies of settlement, of education, agriculture. Many policies need to come together to be able to deal with this issue, because Rwanda is a bit difficult in attending or reaching rural remote if we really need to achieve 100% coverage by 2030 as it's a target in our plans and national plans.
Well, Maurice, we're already in 2020, so we don't know how accountable that is going to be, being that you're talking accountability. Maurice, I want to stay with you regarding the next question, and something that we often don't talk about when it comes to, providing access to water, sanitation, and hygiene to the rural communities, and that's the funding gap, the economy aspect. The approach to it has always been aid funded. And when you talk about things like sustainability, then one would think we could look another way, methodology, maybe look at something like investment funding in the WASH space. Now, how viable is this, and how can you attract investment into this sphere?
We need it to be sustainable. And sometimes government and other people don't look at how the return on proper investment in WASH can be. Actually, if you invest properly in WASH, the water and sanitation services, the return on investment can be huge. It's very important for governments to mobilize funds, to have different strategic and innovative ways of mobilizing funds for WASH. You are very right. It has been funds coming from donors, and unfortunately for the case of Rwanda, many donors have withdrawn from this field, maybe because Rwanda was making some good progress. But to be honest, we still need huge funds to be invested in WASH. And I'm talking about innovative ways of looking at it. Yes, a fund, I don't know, we have seen a global fund for malaria and TB in the past that has yielded very good results. I think that it's high time that countries can think about a global fund for rural water hygiene and sanitation. It's also important to engage the private sector. And without private sector engagement, some aspects, including proper supply chain of needed materials for water and sanitation in rural, can't work. So it's really important to attract investors, private operators, because there is a huge market. Actually, Kwizera, there is a huge market in sanitation. There is a huge market that people don't look at in the sanitation field, for example. There is a huge market in proper management of rural water, because at the end, when people don't mainly complain about the cost of water. They complain about the lack of water. They complain about the long distances to water source. When you are able to avail clean water close to homes, or connecting households, especially poor households, to water, then they pay for water, and there is a return on that investment that people need to be awake and see. And Africa, actually, rural Africa is a huge market for water. It's a huge market for sanitation. So it's a matter of kind of igniting this thinking at global level, at regional level, at national level, so that people can see that market that is not tapped into and be attracted to invest in it. Thank you.
Nachilala, bringing you back into the conversation, Maurice is talking about there being a big market for water. But how do you interest an investor, to put their money in what looks like a very long-term investment, such as WASH?
Okay, so I would like to agree with Maurice that actually there is a case for bankability in terms of provision of water services across our continent. And the approach that WWF has taken, perhaps maybe which the WASH sector could also consider, is to map out the water-related risks that exist at the basin level and use those risks and connect them to the risks of business, the businesses that depend on water actually do face if they don't deal, say, with the issue of water pollution, if they don't deal with the issue of the source of the river or the basin being degraded. And I think that in terms of supporting the WASH goals, some of the options include investments, attracting investors within the water treatment space. I think there's a lot of possibilities there for water that has been used to be cleaned and to be recycled and to be brought back to the market. Obviously, when we're looking at rural Africa, we need to look at tailor-made market solutions for a rural community in terms of the buying and purchasing of water. So I think that the other bigger issue really is that WASH is just one of the need areas for water. There is a bigger need for a more integrated investment plan at the basin level, because we work in key basins across Zambia that are important for supplying water to the rest of the country. And the conversation we have there, apart from encouraging businesses to make commitments to targets and standards to better utilize the water efficiently, is to look at what sort of investments are going to come into this basin, whether it's agriculture investment, whether it's investment that are looking at water supply, and to see how we make connections between private sector entities and the finance community or the investment community to consider coming in as partners to help deal with the issue of water supply and water access. So it's not very developed yet, but basically that is the direction in which we are going. And I think key to that is really the emphasis that we underscore at WWF is that we cannot talk about water supply if we have destroyed water sources. So we need to have a consensus between ourselves as NGOs, with our governments and with private sector to say, water is an important commodity. It comes from somewhere. It doesn't come from a pipe or a tap. So if it comes from somewhere, what activities are going on there that will ensure that this water is available for this generation and for the next generation?
Thank you very much, and thank you for making the time. Unfortunately, with such great conversation, we always run out of time. That was Nachilala Nkombo, Country Director, WWF Zambia. We also had Maurice Kwizera, Country Director of WaterAid, and Olutayo Bankole, or as known as Tayo. She is the Regional Country Director. She is the Regional Director of WaterAid. Now, for more on this conversation, or if you want to be part of it, tweet us at CNBC Africa, or you could tag me directly at The Real Kwizera. Have a great rest of your day.